about 30, 40 years before the Boston Associates came along, the world was still making cloth by hand, processing the fibers, spinning them into yarn, and then using manual looms to create cloth. Around the 1770s, there were some inventions that automated the process of making yarn for weaving. And spinning mills started to appear across the New England landscape.
Francis Cabot Lowell was born to John Lowell, who was a member of the Continental Congress, was a distinguished jurist. He traveled a similar course most Cabots and Lowells would have traveled, going to a preparatory school, then going to Harvard. He majored in mathematics, and then going into business. And at that time, if you were in Boston, there weren't a lot of opportunities for investing in land and other kinds of businesses. Mostly you would be involved in overseas trade. He was a good businessman. He did very well when he was an international trader and when he had India Wharf, and he had a lot of money of his own. He also saw trading as a kind of narrow pursuit, and he wanted to do something on a bigger scale and also one that involved more of his vision for a growing society.
Patrick Tracy Jackson was the younger brother of Francis Cabot Lowell's wife, Hannah Jackson. The Lowell and Jackson families had grown up next door to each other in Newburyport. They were very, very close. Although his father had been a very rich man, his father had lost all his money in the Revolution. So he didn't have the education of his older brothers, one who became a judge, the other became a doctor. He didn't have the education of Francis Cabot Lowell. He didn't go to Harvard. I suppose the appeal to me of Patrick Tracy Jackson is his enterprise, his ambition, his willingness to take risk and to commit to ideas that really had never been tried before.
Nathan Appleton was born in New Ipswich, New Hampshire. What's interesting in terms of how he comes up in life and ends up a Boston associate is that he, around the age of 16, comes to Boston because his brother wants him to work as an apprentice, works as a clerk, and then he begins to become even more experienced in business. So he's looking for more investors, he's looking for more merchandise, until the point that the shop is actually catering to the wealthy and importing luxury goods. And it was possible to actually absorb men who, by their hard work and their increase in wealth, could be absorbed into the aristocracy even if they didn't come with a name. And that's the case with Appleton.
So what Lowell determined properly, I think, is that we would never be independent of the old world, never be independent of England, never be anything more than a colony unless and until we had our own onshore, in-house manufacturing capability.
Francis Cabot Lowell, Henry Lee, and Patrick Tracy Jackson ran a calico importing business from India.
The Napoleonic Wars going on, and Jefferson had put in place an embargo.
That was sort of their financial crisis that led Francis Cabot Lowell to the industrial espionage of examining the looms in England.
He had a mathematical mind. Some biographers will say he memorized everything. He didn't need to do that.
He was able to remember detail and visualize things, enough so to bring it back and tell other people about it.
He went to Boston and they tried to actually experiment in making a mechanical loom. They realized that was beyond what their capabilities were and sought to find a mechanic.
Paul Moody was a mechanical genius with an excellent ability to visualize in 3 dimensions and how things could work. And he left school early, depending on who you read. Formal schooling ended either at age 12 or 15. He just wanted to get out in the world and work with stuff and learn stuff in the real world. And because his family was in the weaving business, he wanted to learn all there was to know about that. So they decided to take Moody, and they looked at the whole range of textile equipment that was available. Moody and Lowell, they tinkered with it. And they worked on it, and they worked on it, and they worked on it, and it wasn't easy. It took them about another year, and they got it to work.
Okay.
The original vision that is attributed to Francis Cabot Lowell and seems to have been achieved at least in the early years here in Waltham.
When he established the Boston Manufacturing Company in 1813, he wanted to integrate the whole process under one roof. So from what we call from bale to bolt. And I think because he wasn't in the world of textile manufacture to begin with, he could see a way of putting the whole process together that wouldn't necessarily have occurred to other people who never had done it that way. It wasn't done here in England or in France.
Once this little mill here on the Charles River becomes a success, they immediately realize they don't have the water power they need to expand.
The one thing about Lowell that kind of limited his involvement is that he was sickly. And he was also doing everything he could to expand the business.
Patrick Tracy Jackson became his right-hand man. And as Francis Cabot Lowell became increasingly ill and ultimately died, it's Patrick Tracy Jackson who takes up the task of developing the mills and eventually finding the fall at Chelmsford and begins what becomes the city of Lowell. So Jackson stays running the mills here, and Kirk Boott is essentially being sent out into a kind of hinterland. Kirk Boott had a very different kind of upbringing, education. He was very liked, man, by the wealth, and very trusted by the wealthy Bostonians, but he is not one of them. He ruled with an iron fist. He was not sympathetic to the needs of the workers. Kirk Boott becomes the beginning of something that just gets worse as Lowell becomes increasingly a city of immigration. And, you know, by the end of the 19th century, you've got Lowell as a hotbed of radical labor.
Well, the Lawrence brothers were brothers, and Amos wanted to be a trader, a mercantilist. Worked his way up to the point that he had earned some money and was able to start a business of his own. At which point his younger brother Abbott came along, and Abbott was lucky. You know, Amos had to go through all of this to find his way in life and to get a business going. Abbott came along and apprenticed. Amos, being older, kind of drifted off into his retirement and became a philanthropist. And when the associates decided that what they had done in Lowell was successful and could be duplicated, Abbott jumped in with both feet and saw that if I create a place where everything you need to build industry exists, I have the infrastructure that brings in the water power, and I have the churches and the schools and the railroads and the so on and so forth, we will make this perfect utopian town, which will sort of be the third time around the proof of concept that Lowell has started back here in Waltham.
The philosophy of the Boston Associates, I would say, is one that tries to balance traditional ideas of community, contribution to that community, with modern ideas of the profit motive, but doesn't want to throw out one for the other.
All the structures that we associate with government either didn't exist or were being created by those persons of wealth.
They were ambivalent about how much wealth they were making. So these philanthropic tendencies was a way to assuage that guilt or ambivalence that they had, but it also showed something more pure in that their belief that you give back to the community. And that's your responsibility to do that.